My name is Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, and 6 months ago, I walked into that marble courthouse wearing my dress blues, while my own family treated me like I was there to beg for scraps. By the time the police sirens stopped wailing and the smoke cleared, everyone in that courtroom realized they'd been fighting over an empire that was never theirs to claim. The steps of Riverside County Courthouse felt like they were carved from judgment itself. Each granite slab seemed to whisper that this place belonged to people with corner offices and Ivy League degrees, not 25-year-old soldiers who still carried sand from Afghanistan in the creases of their boots. The morning sun hit the limestone columns at an angle that made them look like prison bars, and maybe that was fitting. By the end of today, someone was going to be trapped by the truth. I paused at the bottom of those steps, adjusting my dress blue uniform for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The fabric was crisp, perfect, regulation in every detail from the razor-sharp creases to the mirror polish on my shoes. But standing in the shadow of this temple to civilian law, I felt like I was wearing a costume to a play where I didn't know my lines. The early morning traffic hummed behind me, commuters rushing to jobs where the biggest battle was over coffee in the break room. They had no idea that in the next few hours, everything they thought they knew about power and money was about to be turned inside out. Hell, I wasn't even sure I knew what was coming. My phone buzzed. A text from my deployment buddy Martinez. "Kick their asses, LT. Uncle James would be proud." I almost smiled. Martinez didn't know the half of it. None of them did. The courthouse doors were oak and brass, old enough to have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, thick enough to muffle screams. As I pushed through them, the weight of marble and mahogany pressed down like atmosphere on a distant planet. Everything here was designed to remind you that law was serious, expensive, and not for people like me. The lobby buzzed with the controlled chaos of money in motion. Lawyers strode across polished floors like generals commanding armies of paralegals who scurried behind them clutching briefcases and file boxes. Everyone moved with purpose. But it was the kind of purpose that came with billable hours, not the kind that came from protecting something that actually mattered. The sound of my combat boots against the marble echoed with military precision. Click, 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 steady as a metronome, drowning out the whispered conversations and rustling papers. A few heads turned, more curious than concerned. Military personnel in courthouses usually meant divorce proceedings or minor criminal matters, not headline-grabbing inheritance disputes. I spotted my family before they spotted me. Victoria Martinez Ashworth stood near the elevators like a queen holding court, surrounded by what looked like half the legal profession. At 53, she'd perfected the art of looking expensive without looking gaudy. Silver hair swept into a French twist that probably cost more than my monthly base pay charcoal Armani suit that fit like it had been sewn directly onto her body. Pearls that caught the light just enough to remind everyone they were real. She was gesturing with the kind of controlled energy that came from someone who was used to being listened to. Victoria had been the family success story for as long as I could remember. First woman partner at Whitmore, Kessler and Associates. First family member to crack 7 figures. First to completely forget where she came from. Next to her, my cousin Marcus looked like a younger, hungrier version of every corporate lawyer who'd ever foreclosed on a family farm. 28 years old, Harvard Law Review. The kind of smile that could sell ice to Eskimos and foreclose on them the next day. His suit probably cost more than most people made in a month, and his shoes were polished to a mirror finish that would make a drill sergeant weep with pride. The third member of their trinity was new to me, a silver-haired man in his 60s who carried himself like he'd been born wearing a 3-piece suit. Even from across the lobby, I could tell he was expensive. The kind of expensive that came with billable hours in the 4-figure range, and a win rate that could buy small countries. As I approached, fragments of their conversation drifted over the marble acoustics. Precedent in California is clear. Undue influence claims almost never fail. Military personnel are particularly susceptible to exploitation charges. That last one made my jaw tighten, but I kept walking. They could say whatever they wanted for the next few hours. After that, talking would be the least of their problems. Victoria saw me first. Her expression shifted from confident legal strategist to disappointed aunt in the space of a heartbeat. It was a masterful performance, and I almost applauded. "Sarah," she said, her voice carrying just enough warmth to suggest family obligation while maintaining enough distance to remind everyone I didn't really belong. "I'm surprised you came." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, keeping my voice level and my posture military straight. She looked me up and down like a general inspecting troops, taking in every detail of my dress blues. The uniform was perfect. I'd spent 2 hours that morning making sure of it. But in Victoria's eyes, I could see her cataloging it as evidence. The girl who couldn't afford civilian clothes for her own inheritance hearing. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose you wanted to pay your respects to Uncle James one last time before." She paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Before reality sets in." Marcus detached himself from the legal huddle and joined us, extending a hand like we were meeting at a networking event instead of a family war. "Sarah," he said, his lawyer's smile as precise as his handshake, "thanks for coming. I know this must be difficult, given the circumstances." The circumstances. For the past 3 months, that's how they'd been referring to Uncle James's will. Never the inheritance or the estate. Always the circumstances. Like it was a natural disaster that had befallen them instead of a deliberate decision by a man they claimed to love. Those circumstances had kept me awake for weeks. Uncle James's attorney had called me at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Afghanistan, his voice crackling through a satellite connection that made everything sound like it was being transmitted from Mars. "Lieutenant Martinez, I'm calling regarding the estate of James Robert Martinez. You've been named as the primary beneficiary." Primary beneficiary, $47 million in real estate, investments, and J.R. Martinez Security Consulting, one of the most successful private security firms on the West Coast. All of it left to his military family, with a letter explaining that blood wasn't always thicker than water, and sometimes the people who earned your trust weren't the ones who shared your DNA. Victoria's voice cut through my memories. "Where's your lawyer?" I blinked back to the present. "Don't need one." Quote. The silver-haired man stepped forward, and Marcus gestured toward him like he was unveiling a secret weapon. "Sarah, this is Richard Whitmore, senior partner at Whitmore, Kessler & Associates. He'll be representing the family's interests today." Whitmore extended a hand that felt like marble, cold, hard, polished, smooth, by decades of crushing people in courtrooms. "Lieutenant Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from winning cases that bought and sold small countries. "I've heard a great deal about you." "I'll bet you have," I thought, but just said Mr. Whitmore. Marcus actually laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls like breaking glass. "Sarah, this isn't a court-martial, this is probate court. You're about to be challenged on a $47 million inheritance by some of the best legal minds in the state." He gestured toward the conference room visible through glass walls, where I could see at least 6 attorneys arranging documents like they were planning the invasion of Normandy. "Uncle James might have had a soft spot for his military buddies," Victoria added, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining basic math to a struggling student, "but sentiment doesn't hold up in court." Whitmore stepped closer, his presence like a cold front moving in before a storm. "Lieutenant, I understand you've served your country with distinction, and that's admirable. But this is a different kind of battlefield. This is about law, precedent, and evidence. It's about proving that a 73-year-old man with early-stage dementia was manipulated into signing away his family's birthright." The early-stage dementia was news to me, but I kept my expression neutral. Uncle James had been sharper than most people half his age when I'd last seen him 6 months ago. But apparently that inconvenient truth hadn't made it into their case files. "You know what holds up in court?" Victoria continued, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a motherly tone. "Documentation, proof of relationship, evidence of mental competency when the will was signed, medical records showing a pattern of cognitive decline." She leaned closer, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume mixed with legal predator. "We have all of that, Sarah. Boxes of it. What do you have?" Quote. I patted the small leather portfolio tucked under my arm. The same portfolio I'd carried through 3 deployments, the one with scorch marks from an IED blast in Kandahar, and coffee stains from late nights in the Pentagon. Next to their fortress of legal documents, it looked like David's slingshot facing Goliath's army. "Enough," I said simply. They exchanged a look, the kind of look adults give children who insist they can fly or claim monsters live under their beds. It was patronizing, dismissive, and completely certain of its own superiority. Marcus checked his Rolex, a piece of Swiss precision that probably cost more than most soldiers made in 6 months. "Well, we should head in." Judge Hendricks is known for starting precisely on time, and she doesn't appreciate attorneys who think their schedule is more important than hers. As we walked toward the courtroom, I caught fragments of conversations from Victoria's legal army. Clear case of undue influence. Plaintiff lacks standing to contest family inheritance rights. Military personnel often target elderly veterans for financial exploitation. Pattern of isolation from legitimate family members. Cognitive assessment shows diminished capacity during will execution. That last batch made my hands clench into fists, but I forced them to relax. They could say whatever they wanted about me. I'd been called worse things by better people. But attacking Uncle James's mental state, suggesting he was some confused old man who'd been tricked by a manipulative soldier? That crossed a line they didn't even know existed. The courtroom doors were brass and mahogany, heavy enough to stop bullets and thick enough to muffle screams. As we approached, I could see through the glass panels that the gallery was already full. Local media had picked up the story. $47 million military inheritance sparks family battle had been the Sacramento Bee's headline yesterday, complete with photos of Victoria leaving her office and a grainy shot of me in uniform from my last promotion ceremony. Inside, the courtroom was exactly what central casting would order for a high-stakes legal drama. Dark wood paneling that had probably witnessed more justice than anyone in the room today. High ceilings that made every word echo with importance. And an American flag that had presided over decades of legal theater. Victoria's legal team had claimed the entire front section like an occupying army. Briefcases and file boxes created a fortress of paperwork that stretched across 3 tables. Paralegals moved with the efficiency of worker ants, arranging documents in precise stacks and connecting laptops to projection systems. One table held nothing but medical records. Uncle James's entire health history laid out like evidence of a crime. Another table displayed family photos going back decades. Victoria and Marcus at graduations, weddings, holiday gatherings, all smiling and looking like the kind of family that belonged in Christmas card advertisements. The timeline was carefully curated to show a loving family torn apart by outside manipulation. I sat alone at the plaintiff's table, my small portfolio looking almost comical next to their mountain of evidence. The leather was worn smooth by years of use, scarred by deployment after deployment, held together in one corner with military-grade tape. It contained exactly 7 documents, but they were the only 7 that mattered. The bailiff entered first, a large man with the bearing of someone who'd spent years dealing with people who thought money made them special. All rise. The Superior Court of California, County of Riverside, is now in session. The Honorable Patricia Hendricks presiding. Judge Hendricks entered with the no-nonsense bearing of someone who'd seen every trick in the book and invented a few of her own. At 62, she'd spent 30 years on the bench dealing with inheritance disputes, custody battles, and every other way families found to destroy each other with legal weapons. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes held the kind of sharp intelligence that could cut through lies like a laser through tissue paper. "Be seated," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the marble acoustics. "This is the matter of Martinez versus Martinez, regarding the estate of James Robert Martinez, deceased. I've reviewed the initial filings, and I understand we're dealing with a contested will situation involving significant assets." She looked directly at Victoria's legal fortress. "I also understand that one party is represented by extensive counsel while the other has chosen to proceed pro se. Lieutenant Martinez, you're aware that you have the right to legal representation?" I stood at attention. "Yes, Your Honor. I've chosen to represent myself." "Very well. Mr. Whitmore, I assume you're lead counsel for the respondents?" Quote. Whitmore rose with theatrical precision, his silver hair catching the courtroom lights like a crown. Yes, Your Honor. Richard Whitmore of Whitmore, Kessler and Associates, representing Victoria Martinez Ashworth and Marcus Martinez Kessler, in their challenge to the purported will of James Robert Martinez. Counselor, you may proceed with your opening statement. Whitmore stepped to the center of the courtroom like a conductor approaching his orchestra. He paused for a moment, letting the silence build drama, then began with the kind of voice that had probably swayed juries for decades. Your Honor, this case is about protecting the fundamental rights of legitimate family members against what can only be described as a calculated and systematic campaign of emotional manipulation and financial exploitation. He clicked a remote control, and a presentation screen descended from the ceiling with mechanical precision. The first image was a family tree, meticulously researched and professionally designed, showing 3 generations of Martinez family connections. Victoria and Marcus were highlighted in blue as legitimate blood relatives, while my name appeared in red as non-family military associate. The respondents will demonstrate beyond any reasonable doubt that Lieutenant Sarah Martinez leveraged her military connection to James Martinez to systematically isolate him from his family, manipulate his emotional state, and ultimately influence the creation of a will that defies both logic and natural family bonds. The screen changed to show a timeline of Uncle James's life, with my military service overlaid in red like a virus spreading through the family tree. Photos appeared showing Victoria and Marcus at family gatherings, graduations, holiday celebrations, all carefully selected to show a loving, traditional family unit. Then came the photos of me with Uncle James, always in uniform, always at military events, always separate from the family gatherings. The presentation made it look like I'd infiltrated their perfect family like some kind of mercenary. Notice the pattern, Your Honor, Whitmore continued, his voice taking on the rhythm of a prosecutor building toward a conviction. Every significant change to Mr. Martinez's estate planning coincided with increased contact with the plaintiff. Every revision to his will removed more assets from his legitimate blood relatives and transferred them to someone who shared nothing but a uniform and a surname. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that had appeared at exactly the right moment in exactly the right place. The performance was flawless. Grief, betrayal, and wounded family loyalty, all perfectly calibrated for maximum jury impact. Too bad this was a bench trial. Marcus stared at me with what I assumed was supposed to be disappointed betrayal, like I'd personally stolen Christmas from the entire family. His expression was so perfectly crafted that I almost checked to see if he had acting coaches hiding in the gallery. Whitmore pulled out document after document, each one presented with the ceremony of a prosecutor unveiling murder weapons. Bank statements showing Uncle James's increasing donations to military charities. Phone records showing weekly calls to my deployment addresses. Hotel receipts from when he'd visited me at various bases around the world. The evidence will show that James Martinez was systematically isolated from his family through a carefully orchestrated campaign of emotional manipulation disguised as patriotic duty, Whitmore declared, his voice rising with righteous indignation. The plaintiff exploited his military background, his documented guilt over never serving in combat himself, and his deteriorating mental state to essentially steal a fortune that rightfully belongs to his blood relatives. He gestured toward a table loaded with medical records. Expert testimony will demonstrate that Mr. Martinez was suffering from early-stage Alzheimer's disease, that his cognitive capacity was significantly compromised during the period when this suspicious will was executed, and that he was particularly vulnerable to the kind of emotional manipulation documented in these records. The medical expert, a distinguished-looking man in his 70s, nodded gravely from the gallery. Dr. Something or other, probably with more degrees than a thermometer and a fee structure that could finance small wars. Furthermore, Whitmore continued, we will show that the plaintiff had both motive and opportunity to manipulate Mr. Martinez. Financial records indicate that Lieutenant Martinez was facing significant personal debt, had been passed over for promotion multiple times, and was approaching the end of her military career with limited civilian prospects. Quote, that was complete bullshit, but I kept my expression neutral. My finances were solid, my promotion record was exemplary, and my limited civilian prospects included 3 job offers from defense contractors and a standing invitation to join Uncle James's security firm. But apparently those inconvenient facts hadn't made it into their carefully curated narrative. Whitmore was building toward his crescendo now, his voice taking on the cadence of a revival preacher. This case is about justice, Your Honor. It's about protecting the rights of a family that loved James Martinez long before Lieutenant Martinez ever appeared in his life. It's about ensuring that predators cannot exploit our elderly veterans and steal from their rightful heirs. He paused, scanning the courtroom like a conductor waiting for the orchestra to reach perfect silence. The respondents ask this court to void the fraudulent will, restore the estate to its rightful owners, and send a clear message that this kind of exploitation will not be tolerated in Riverside County. He returned to his seat with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just delivered a knockout punch in the first round. Victoria squeezed his arm and whispered something that made him smile. Marcus was already taking notes, probably planning victory interviews with the local media. Judge Hendricks looked at me over her reading glasses. Lieutenant Martinez, do you wish to make an opening statement? I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the courtroom tracking my movement like laser sights. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, broken only by the soft whir of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. For a moment, I just stood there, letting them think I was nervous, unprepared, maybe even reconsidering my decision to represent myself. Let them think they'd already won. Then I smiled. Your Honor, I began, my voice clear and steady as a rifle shot. Mr. Whitmore is absolutely right about one thing. This case is about protecting legitimate rights, but he's completely wrong about whose rights those are. I walked to the center of the courtroom, my boots clicking against the marble floor with military precision. Each step echoed through the high-ceilinged space like a countdown to something these people weren't prepared for. For the past 30 minutes, you've heard about documentation, evidence, and proof. You've heard about blood relatives and legitimate heirs. You've heard about exploitation, manipulation, and fraud. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across Victoria's legal fortress. What you haven't heard is the truth about who James Martinez really was, and why he chose to leave his fortune to someone they clearly consider unworthy. Victoria shifted in her seat like she was sitting on pins. Marcus had stopped taking notes and was staring at me with something that might have been the first flicker of doubt. Uncle James wasn't just a successful businessman, I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the marble acoustics. He wasn't just a veteran who felt guilty about never serving in combat. He wasn't just a confused old man with early-stage dementia who could be manipulated by a scheming soldier. I turned to face Victoria directly, and for the first time since I'd entered the courthouse, I saw something flicker in her eyes that wasn't complete confidence. He was something else entirely, something that all these documents, I gestured toward their mountain of paperwork, will never show you, something that would make this entire proceeding not just wrong, but irrelevant. Judge Hendricks leaned forward slightly. What are you suggesting, Lieutenant? I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It looked ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of thing that could easily get lost in their forest of legal documents. But in the sudden silence of the courtroom, it might as well have been a lit stick of dynamite. This, I said, holding it up so everyone could see, changes everything they think they know about this case. Whitmore was already starting to rise from his chair, his legal instincts sensing danger like a shark smelling blood in the water. Objection, Your Honor. There's been no evidence presented of any additional documentation and... Mr. Whitmore, Judge Hendricks said quietly, her voice cutting through his objection like a blade through silk, I suggest you let the lieutenant finish. I looked directly at Victoria, whose face had gone from confident to confused, to something that might have been fear. The color was draining from her cheeks, like someone had opened a valve. Because you see, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, when you're fighting over the estate of a decorated CIA operative who spent 30 years running classified operations in 17 countries, civilian probate court is just the beginning of your problems. Quote, the paper in my hand wasn't just any document. It was a national security directive. And in about 60 seconds, everyone in this room was going to understand exactly what that meant. The silence in the courtroom was so complete I could hear the judge's watch ticking from 20 feet away. Victoria's face had gone from pale to ashen, and Marcus looked like someone had just told him his Harvard degree was printed on toilet paper. But I wasn't done yet. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady as bedrock. "Before we proceed any further, I need to inform the court that this matter involves classified national security issues that may require immediate federal intervention." Judge Hendricks blinked slowly, like someone had just spoken to her in a foreign language. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant. Did you say national security?" "Yes, ma'am. And I'm afraid that what happens next is completely out of all our hands." The silence that followed my national security bombshell lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then the courtroom exploded into controlled chaos. Whitmore shot to his feet like he'd been launched from a catapult. "Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate attempt to derail legitimate probate proceedings with sensationalist claims. The plaintiff has provided no evidence." "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Hendricks said, her voice cutting through his objection with surgical precision, "you will sit down and remain silent until I ask for your input." The judge's eyes fixed on me with the intensity of a sniper's scope. "Lieutenant Martinez, you're claiming that this inheritance dispute involves classified national security matters?" "Yes, Your Honor." James Robert Martinez held a security clearance level that made his estate subject to federal oversight. "This document," I held up the paper, "is a Department of Defense directive that supersedes civilian probate jurisdiction." Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak than her usual commanding tone. "That's impossible. James was a businessman. He ran a security consulting firm. He never worked for the government." I turned to look at her, and for the first time since walking into this courthouse, I allowed myself a small smile. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you have no idea what your brother actually did for a living." Marcus slammed his legal pad down on the table, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. "This is ridiculous. Uncle James owned office buildings and apartment complexes. He consulted on corporate security. We have his tax returns, his business licenses, his cover identity," I finished quietly. "Very well constructed, very thoroughly documented. It had to be. He spent 3 decades maintaining it." The color drained from Marcus's face like someone had pulled a plug. "Cover identity? What the hell are you talking about?" Judge Hendricks held up a hand for silence. "Lieutenant, I'm going to need to see that document." I walked to the bench, my boots clicking against the marble floor in the sudden silence. As I handed the paper to Judge Hendricks, I caught a glimpse of Victoria whispering urgently to Whitmore, her composure finally starting to crack around the edges. The judge adjusted her reading glasses and scanned the document. I watched her expression change from skeptical to confused, to something that might have been alarm. She read it twice, then looked up at me with new understanding. "This is authentic?" she asked quietly. "Yes, Your Honor." "You can verify it with the Department of Defense if necessary. The authentication code is at the bottom." Whitmore was on his feet again, his silver hair slightly disheveled for the first time since I'd met him. "Your Honor, I demand to see this alleged document. My clients have a right to examine any evidence presented in these proceedings." Judge Hendricks looked at the paper again, then at me. "Lieutenant, what exactly does this document authorize?" "It establishes federal jurisdiction over James Martinez's estate due to the classified nature of his assets and the potential national security implications of their disposition. It also authorizes appropriate federal agencies to intervene if civilian courts proceed without proper clearance." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Victoria's whispered conversation with Whitmore became more urgent, and I could see panic starting to creep into her perfectly controlled facade. "This is insane," Marcus said, his voice rising with each word. "You're claiming our uncle was some kind of spy? He lived in Riverside. He played golf at the country club. He donated to the Chamber of Commerce." "Perfect cover," I replied. "The best operatives always hide in plain sight." Whitmore stepped forward, his legal predator instincts overriding his confusion. "Your Honor, even if this document is authentic, it doesn't change the fundamental facts of this case. We're dealing with a will that was executed under questionable circumstances, regardless of the deceased's alleged professional activities. He was grasping for control, trying to steer the proceedings back to familiar territory. But the ground had already shifted beneath all of us, and he was starting to realize it." Furthermore, he continued, his voice gaining confidence as he found his rhythm, the plaintiff's military service doesn't give her special standing in civilian court. If anything, this dramatic revelation suggests she may have exploited classified information to manipulate an elderly veteran. That accusation hit the courtroom like a slap across the face. Several people in the gallery gasped, and I saw a couple of reporters scribbling frantically in their notebooks. Victoria's expression brightened for the first time since I'd produced the document. She thought Whitmore had found an angle that could save them. "Let me understand your position, Mr. Whitmore," I said, turning to face him directly. "You're suggesting that I exploited classified information to manipulate Uncle James into leaving me his estate?" "It's a reasonable explanation for these circumstances, yes." I nodded slowly, like I was considering his theory. "So in your professional opinion, a 25-year-old Army lieutenant somehow gained access to classified CIA operational files, used that information to convince a veteran intelligence operative to rewrite his will, and then waltzed into civilian court with federal documents to cover up the fraud?" When he put it like that, it sounded ridiculous even to him. But Whitmore was too experienced to back down. "Stranger things have happened in inheritance disputes, Lieutenant." "Have they?" I asked. "How many inheritance disputes have you handled involving active CIA operatives, Mr. Whitmore?" "I fail to see how that's relevant." "It's relevant because you're operating under the assumption that civilian law takes precedence over national security protocols. That assumption is incorrect." Just then, the heavy courtroom doors opened with a sound like thunder rolling across the mountains. The sudden noise cut through our argument like a blade through silk, and every head in the room turned toward the entrance. 3 people in dark suits walked in with the kind of purposeful stride that belonged to federal agents who were very serious about their jobs. They moved like sharks through water, smooth, deadly, absolutely certain of their purpose. The lead agent was a woman in her 40s, with the bearing of someone who'd seen things that would give normal people nightmares. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes swept the courtroom with the efficiency of a tactical assessment. Behind her, 2 men in identical suits flanked her like bodyguards, their hands resting casually near their jackets in a way that suggested they were armed and comfortable with violence. The lead agent walked directly to the bench and presented her credentials to Judge Hendricks with the crisp efficiency of someone who'd done this countless times before. "Your Honor, I'm Special Agent Rebecca Chen, Department of Justice National Security Division. We need to discuss the national security implications of these proceedings." The courtroom went dead silent, except for the sound of Victoria hyperventilating and Marcus muttering what sounded like prayers in Latin. Judge Hendricks examined the credentials with the expression of someone who just realized they were in way over their head. "Agent Chen, this is highly irregular." "Yes, Your Honor, it is. But these are irregular circumstances." Agent Chen turned to survey the courtroom, her gaze lingering on Victoria and Marcus before settling on me. "Lieutenant Martinez, thank you for filing the appropriate notifications. Your adherence to protocol has been noted." Victoria's voice came out as barely a whisper. "What notifications?" Agent Chen turned to look at her with the kind of stare that could freeze helium. "Ma'am, at 0800 this morning, Lieutenant Martinez filed a notification with the Department of Justice regarding potential security violations related to these proceedings. Standard protocol when civilian courts attempt to distribute classified assets." "Classified assets?" Marcus's voice cracked like a teenager's. "What classified assets?" Agent Chen pulled out a tablet and consulted it with professional efficiency. "Mr. Marcus Martinez Kessler, Mrs. Victoria Martinez Ashworth, you and your legal team have been attempting to claim ownership of assets belonging to a classified intelligence operation. That constitutes a federal crime." The words hit the courtroom like a sledgehammer. Victoria's face went from pale to gray, and Marcus looked like he was about to faint. Whitmore was frantically shuffling through his papers, looking for some legal precedent that could help him understand what was happening. "I don't understand," Victoria said, her voice barely audible. "James was my brother. We're family. How can it be a crime to inherit from family?" Agent Chen's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained professionally neutral. "Ma'am, your brother James Robert Martinez was a deep-cover CIA operative for 31 years. Everything he owned, his businesses, his real estate, his financial assets, was connected to ongoing intelligence operations. Those assets cannot be distributed through civilian channels without compromising national security. The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. She staggered in her chair, reaching for the table to steady herself. 31 years? But that would mean he was recruited right out of college. He was, I said quietly. The business degree from UC Davis, the early success in real estate, the security consulting firm, all of it was carefully constructed to provide operational cover. Marcus was staring at me like I'd just spoken in ancient Sumerian. You knew? All this time you knew? Marcus, I didn't just know, I was part of it. Agent Chen nodded approvingly. Lieutenant Martinez has been James Martinez's operational handler for the past 3 years. She was specifically recruited for the assignment due to her family connection and her exemplary service record. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Victoria's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. Handler? You were his handler? Yes, ma'am. When intelligence operatives reach retirement age, they don't just disappear. They require ongoing supervision, protection, and in some cases, active management. Uncle James was considered a high-value asset due to his knowledge of foreign corporate espionage networks. Whitmore finally found his voice, though it came out several octaves higher than his usual commanding tone. Your Honor, this changes everything about our case. Agent Chen turned her attention to the attorney with the expression of a predator studying prey. Mr. Whitmore, your case was doomed from the moment you filed it. You cannot contest a will that was created under federal oversight and approved by multiple intelligence agencies. Federal oversight? Whitmore's voice was barely a whisper. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out another document. This one, bearing so many official seals and signatures that it looked like a small flag. This is the federal authorization for Uncle James's final will and testament. It was reviewed and approved by the CIA, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Justice before execution. Judge Hendricks took the document with trembling hands. As she read it, her face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked like awe mixed with terror. According to this, she said slowly, the federal government not only approved Mr. Martinez's will, but actively participated in its creation to ensure proper disposition of classified assets. That's correct, Your Honor, Agent Chen confirmed. The will was written to protect ongoing operations while honoring Mr. Martinez's desire to provide for his chosen successor. Victoria finally exploded. Chosen successor? She's not even really family. She's just some soldier who... Mrs. Martinez Ashworth, Agent Chen interrupted, her voice cutting through Victoria's outburst like a laser through tissue paper. Lieutenant Martinez is not just some soldier. She holds a top-secret/SCI clearance with additional compartmentalized access that most members of Congress don't possess. She was hand-picked by your brother to continue his work. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning cycling on in the basement of the building. Continue his work? Marcus whispered. Agent Chen consulted her tablet again. J.R. Martinez Security Consulting will continue operations under Lieutenant Martinez's direction. The firm's government contracts, worth approximately $23 million annually, require someone with appropriate clearance and operational experience. Victoria buried her face in her hands. Oh my God, all those years, all those family dinners where he seemed distracted, all those business trips. He was protecting you, I said gently. By keeping you ignorant of his real work, he kept you safe from the kind of people who would have used you as leverage against him. Marcus was still staring at the pile of federal documents like they might explain the meaning of life. But we're family, doesn't that count for anything? Agent Chen's expression softened slightly. Mr. Martinez Kessler, your uncle loved you very much. That's exactly why he couldn't involve you in his real life. Intelligence operatives' families are always potential targets. Ignorance was your protection. Whitmore was desperately trying to salvage something from the wreckage of his case. Your Honor, even accepting all of these revelations, surely there must be some compensation for the family, some recognition of their relationship to the deceased. Agent Chen turned to him with something that might have been sympathy. Mr. Whitmore, Your clients were never going to inherit anything significant from James Martinez. The will you've been contesting was essentially a cover document. The real assets were always going to remain under government control. Cover document? Victoria's voice was getting higher with each revelation. What do you mean, cover document? I pulled out one final paper from my portfolio, a single sheet that looked deceptively simple compared to all the official documents we'd been passing around. This, I said, holding it up, is Uncle James's personal letter to his family. He wrote it knowing that this day would come, knowing that you would eventually learn the truth about his life. Judge Hendricks gestured for me to approach the bench. I handed her the letter, and she read it silently, her expression growing softer with each line. Mr. Martinez Kessler, Mrs. Martinez Ashworth, she said finally, would you like me to read this aloud? Victoria nodded, unable to speak. Marcus managed a whispered yes. Judge Hendricks cleared her throat and began to read. To my beloved sister Victoria and my dear nephew Marcus, if you are hearing this letter, it means that Sarah has been forced to reveal the truth about my life. I know this comes as a shock, and I know you feel betrayed by my deception. But please understand that every lie I told you, every secret I kept, was to protect you from a world you never chose to enter. Victoria, you were always the strong one, the successful one, the one who made our parents proud. I watched you build your law practice and your family with the kind of courage I could only admire from a distance. But my work required a different kind of courage. The courage to live a lie so complete that even the people I loved most couldn't know who I really was. Marcus, you have your mother's brilliant mind and your grandfather's sense of justice. I see a bright future ahead of you, one unmarked by the shadows that have defined my life. That's exactly what I wanted for you. Sarah is not just my successor. She's the daughter I never had and the soldier I always wished I could have been. She has proven herself worthy of trust, in ways that would make you proud if you could know the full story. I leave my work to her, not because she earned it through blood, but because she earned it through service. The money I'm leaving you, Victoria, the trust fund for your children's education, and Marcus, the fund for your new practice, comes from legitimate business profits, not from anything connected to my government work. It's clean money, earned through honest consulting work, and it comes with my love and my hope for your happiness. Please don't hate Sarah for the secret she was forced to keep. She wanted to tell you the truth many times, but operational security required her silence. She has protected you as much as I have. I die knowing that the two families I loved, the one I was born into and the one I chose through service, will take care of each other. Victoria, Marcus, please welcome Sarah into our family, not as an interloper, but as the sister and cousin she has always been in my heart. All my love, always and forever, your brother and Uncle James. The letter's words echoed through the marble courtroom like a benediction. Victoria was crying openly now, her perfect composure completely shattered. Marcus had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Agent Chen stepped forward with a manila envelope. Mrs. Martinez Ashworth, Mr. Martinez Kessler, these are the financial documents referenced in your brother's letter. The trust funds are substantial and completely legal. They're your inheritance, with no strings attached and no government oversight. Victoria looked up at me through her tears. Sarah, I'm so sorry, we had no idea. Ma'am, you had no way of knowing. Uncle James made sure of that. Marcus raised his head, his eyes red but determined. What happens now? To his business? To his work? The work continues, I said simply, but under different management. The same mission, the same commitment to protecting people who can't protect themselves, but with new leadership. Agent Chen consulted her tablet one final time. Your Honor, the Department of Justice is satisfied that this matter has been resolved appropriately. We'll be taking custody of the classified materials and ensuring proper disposition of the remaining assets. Judge Hendricks nodded slowly. This court recognizes the validity of the federal will and transfers all contested assets to Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, as authorized by the appropriate government agencies. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder, but nobody moved. The legal battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. As the federal agents began gathering documents and the reporters rushed out to file their stories, Victoria approached me hesitantly. Sarah, she said, her voice still shaky, would you like to come to dinner this weekend? I think we have a lot to talk about. I smiled, feeling a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying finally lift from my shoulders. I'd like that very much. Marcus joined us, extending his hand in a gesture that was nothing like the cold formality of our earlier meeting. Welcome to the family, cousin. The real family this time. As we shook hands, I could hear sirens in the distance. Probably more federal agents coming to secure the remaining classified materials. But for the first time since walking into this courthouse, I wasn't worried about what came next. Uncle James had always said that the best operations were the ones where everybody won something, even if they didn't get everything they wanted. Looking at Victoria and Marcus, confused, humbled, but finally ready to accept the truth, I thought he would have been proud of how this one turned out. The inheritance battle was over. The real inheritance, family, trust, and understanding, was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already broadcasting live updates. Classified CIA estate battle resolved. Military operatives' secret life revealed in court. Family reconciles after federal intervention. But inside the marble halls of justice, 3 people who had been strangers that morning were walking out together as family. And sometimes, that's the only victory that really matters. The paper that changed everything wasn't just a legal document. It was the key to a truth that had been hidden for 30 years. A truth that revealed not just who Uncle James really was, but who we all could become when we stopped fighting over what we thought we deserved and started appreciating what we actually had. Justice, it turned out, wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding. And understanding, once achieved, could heal wounds that had seemed impossible to mend. As we walked down those granite steps together, I realized that Uncle James had engineered his greatest operation yet, one that brought his 2 families together under the banner of truth, respect, and love. The mission was complete. The real work of being family could finally begin,